So when I pointed out when we were reading the Torah, what was happening with the coming and the going and the different journeys that were happening, did anybody notice anything?
It's like reading a triptych.
Okay.
Do you know what a triptych is?
I do, but do you want to explain? Yeah.
Just you have to tell people.
So what Mark said was it's like reading a triptych, right? It's like reading. It's funny that you use that term because I guess in my generation I was thinking like MapQuest, right? Like that you would right, yes. That you would see how you're going to get from one place to the next, and then when you leave that place, you're going to this place, and then when you leave that place, you're going to this place, right? It's not like reading a map, because it's not telling you the things you're going to see, but it's marking the locations that you're coming from and that you're going to. What else did people notice? Yeah, Rebecca?
There's a lot, when there was a little bit of detail, it was about water.
Oh, interesting.
Wasn't there water?
Okay, great. So when there was detail, it was about water, was one of the ways in which there was detail shared. Great. Anything else people notice, Rick?
It didn't mention that Miriam was gone.
Right.
And that Aaron was gone.
Great. So we didn't hear again that Miriam has died, though interesting enough, that would have been connected to water. But we do hear that Aaron dies. And this is not where Aaron dies. This is just the recalling of Aaron's death. Anything else people noticed? Yeah, Alan.
Well, there was a commentary, and they said they talked about
Extra credit. Alan did extra credit. Read the commentary. Okay.
No. The commentary here in the book.
Yeah. I know.
They're talking about where there was like crying out for all the food for the table.
Yeah.
Yet in the text itself, there was no express reference to that for the something
Great. So Alan is pointing out that there's this moment where we recall something. He's specifically talking about this moment of food, right? That we call out something, but in the text, in this triptych that Marcus is calling it, we're not actually talking about any of that, right? So the things that are being brought up, water, this food moment, the moment of Aaron's death, those aren't actually things that are being recognized in the, and then they camped, and then they left, and then they camped, and then they left. That's not being mentioned. But then the Torah decides to go into detail about very specific things that happened along the journey, even though they're not being mentioned specifically as locations for what happened, for where it happened, excuse me. Yeah, Paula.
Where else do we read about the wilderness of Zin?
Scene, yeah.
It's somewhere else.
Yeah, it is somewhere else. I don't remember which parsha it's in.
I felt like it was at the beginning of Dvarim.
So Dvarim would be coming next. So it's possible that we're going to mention it in the next book. But it's possible. I think that it's mentioned actually in Shemot. I would have to look back. It's mentioned before this, right? So a lot of these places, we are now in a mode, in the Torah, we are in a mode of recalling, right? Nothing that is happening now is happening new. So anything that we're talking about is bringing us back to something that has happened before. We didn't read this part today, but what I taught about last week, the daughters of Slofchad, is brought back again in this week's Parsha, as if we forgot that it happened in last week's Parsha. But it gets brought back again because now we're in this mode of recalling, of understanding things that have happened before us. Was there another?
No, I was just
Why the recalling?
I don't know why are we talking about, why are we back in Egypt?
Yeah, so why are we back in Egypt? So Ari's asking a good question. Why do we even have to do all this recalling, right? What's the point of it? Well, what's coming next is Moshe's whole kind of recapitulation of his journey, of his life's journey. So what we need to do is we need to put ourselves in the context of where are we, what has happened, and then being able to do that whole recap so that we understand what we've come from. If you only were to read, I see your hand, don't worry. If we were only to read Deuteronomy, you would get the majority of our Torah, but you wouldn't necessarily know where we came from. So this question. So it is as if some might question if we were ever really there. Yes. Yeah, Carmela.
Yeah, I was impressed by all the names
Yes.
there of the places.
Yeah, great.
And a lot of them already named in Israel. but I feel like we have a long way to go to name even more places in Israel
Yeah.
that we didn't name it yet according to the
Yeah, so I think past and present are getting a little mixed up here, but the places that you are noticing in the Torah are places that you may notice now in Israel, right? It is not the reverse. It's not the reverse that they were already named and then they were and then we came to know their names later on. It's that now in the 21st century we recognize some of these names based off of places that were named during this time. We're going to get actually to a commentary that talks specifically about the names. And what these names were and why or why not we might recognize them or not recognize them. One thing that I noticed while Rick was reading a very long aliyah was that there's one point where the names go from just names to actual feelings. And I didn't bring that here because I didn't notice it when I was making this teaching. But there's this moment of charedah is one of the words, like this there are different feelings that are being felt. So they left from this place of sadness and they arrived at this place of trembling, and they left from this place. And it's a very, next year, I'll teach on that next year. It's a very interesting concept that we're not just going from places that we know as, Santa Monica and Westwood, but places that are actually evocative of how we felt in those moments. So we'll get there next year. Yeah, did you have something, Bobby?
It's separately speaking, when it comes to like memory,
Yeah.
a lot of memory champions, they talk about how if you want to remember a lot of things in order, if it's more outrageous or more hilarious or more emotional, it's easier to remember.
Great.
And in this regard, it's kind of like landmarks or things of emotion that allow us to remember it better. If you're giving directions to somebody by word of mouth, you're like, take a left. In Atlanta, there's the Big Chicken, which is like this big landmark, and so it's easy to remember.
Sure.
Or it's like take a right at where we went, doing whatever. And so
Yeah. Great. That was a really good transition, because the next thing that I was going to ask is why? Like, why is this even important, right, for us to name these places? And Bobby's bringing up a really beautiful point that when this helps with memory, right? This helps us remember where we came from, where are we going, what happened in those places. The commentary that we're going to get to in a few moments is going to actually tell us that these names were not the names that they were when we went through them, but because of our memory and because of the things that happened there, we changed their names, right? Because this is a ridiculous example, and my brother would probably kill me for sharing it, so those of you who know my brother, maybe keep it to yourselves. When we were growing up, there were 3 different malls that we went to. We grew up in Westwood, so there was Westside Pavilion, which is now Google or something. I don't know. It's something. But it used to be a mall. And then Century City, which now people know as Westfield Century City, but it was just Century City back in the day. And then there was another mall that I'm not even remembering the name of. Anyway, and we would go to those 3 different malls, and each one of them had a grocery store in it. And for whatever reason, my brother is much smarter than I, so maybe his brain works in colors, but he named each grocery store by color. So he would say, are we going to the purple store? Are we going to the brown store? And I think the other one was black. No reason why. The color, the logos are not those colors, no reason why. But for him, he was connecting something that I still don't understand. He was connecting something to those places that was how he remembered where we were going, and it had an association with it. So that's what's happening here, is they're naming these places based off of things that happened to them and how they felt in those places. And again, maybe they weren't even called these things. It's just that that's what they decided to call them, so they knew where they had been. But why do this at all? Why do this at all, and why spend the many columns of Torah having to write this down at all? Yeah, Nico.
So the other day I went back home and sort of did a little personal pilgrimage of like high school, elementary school, middle school,
Sure.
houses we grew up in, and like just sort of like string together the story and sort of like take myself back to those moments.
Yeah.
And this very much feels like that.
Yeah,
I think
great.
Each individually can do that and do that in certain points in our lives.
Sure.
But it's like you drive around and you're like, oh, that used to be Blockbuster.
Yeah.
That used to be the music store. Now it's gone.
Right.
And like it forces you to like remember and consolidate.
Yeah, great. So it's kind of like going through our childhood bedroom or going through a journal, right, and remembering different things that we did in different places that, as Bobby mentioned, like definitely brings up memories for us, but also takes us back to places, right? When we look through our high school yearbook, it takes us back to memories of high school, whether or not we want to be taken back there, takes us back to memories of high school that we probably aren't thinking about all the time, right? We're probably not still dwelling in our high school years and dramas, but rather being able to open up a picture of a loved one who's no longer alive, or of a place that something magical happened in our past, right? Like being able to see those things or to read about those moments allows us to enter back into that space. Great. I saw another hand. Oh, Marshall.
Yeah, actually, I read about this as I was walking the shul this morning, and the three places specifically where the people really just sort of screwed up. You had Marah, you had Rafidim, and you had Kibrot Ha'ava.
Okay.
And maybe the role of a good leader is not to rehash in full detail one's failures.
Okay.
But just merely to mention them, that this is part of the journey also.
Okay, great. So Marshall's also mentioning that sometimes when we go through things in life, we don't need to dwell in those things, but it's part of our story, right? All of these places were part of our story, even the places where bad things happened to us or where we did bad things. That's going to be important in a second. And yet those places need to be mentioned because it's part of who we are and it's part of who our people are. And so we go from this list of places to the second text. Now we're on this source sheet. So we're on the first page. I'm going to skip the first few verses. Sorry, it's 1 through 4. I forgot to write in the 4 there. But we're going to skip to Numbers 33, 38 through 39. I did in the Hebrew, but not in the English. Sorry about that. So it says, there's tons up here. Not tons, but there's. Okay. Aaron, the priest, ascended Mount Hor at the command of God and died there. Right, so now we're coming out of this list of places that we've been, and we're mentioning that Aaron died. In the 40th year after the Israelites had left the land of Egypt, on the first day of the 5th month, Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. If you go into the Chumash, if you're actually looking in the text, we then just go right back into a list of places. Right, we kind of come out of the list of places, we mention a thing that happened that we feel is necessary for us to know about, and then we go back into a list of places. Yeah, Rick?
Can I do a trope thing?
Is it 10 seconds long?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, moving from place to place, it's very repetitive.
Yes.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Then when you get to Vayal there, it's da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Mm-hmm.
He's going up the mountain.
Yeah.
Sometimes the trope are directional.
Great.
And then the Aharon, he was a simple, he's a quiet, peacemaker kind of guy. He gets a very simple, could have been a shalshelet, could have been a very fancy trope there, but just the Aharon.
Mm-hmm.
So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Beautiful. Okay, then the next piece here, when we go completely out of context of all these different places, but still going to recognize places. Okay, I know that sounded like a dumb sentence, but I think it'll make sense in a second. We're not talking about now going and coming. We are talking about what might happen when we land in a certain place, when our journey stops somewhere, or when we do something along the journey. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall provide yourselves with place to serve you as cities of refuge, to which a person who has killed someone, who has slain a person unintentionally, may flee. Okay, before reading on, I know some of you know what cities of refuge are and have heard about this before. And it's actually not the main topic of this teaching, but I wanted to bring this in here. What does this do? What does this allow for on our journey? What do these cities of refuge do on our journey for us? Yeah. Yes, stuff happens. Right? This goes back to the point that Marshall was making, that on our journeys, we're not always going to do the right thing. We're not always going to do everything intentionally. We're not always going to be able to be our best versions of ourselves. But anything that we do is still part of our journey. Right? And when I say journey, I can mean an entire life. I can also mean a day. Right? There are moments at work that I am very proud of myself, and there are other moments at work where I think, wow, Rebecca, you could have done much better than that. Right? Because we all have moments, but that still adds up in our character and in our community's character. Right? So what we're doing here in this moment of our journey is saying, you're going to make mistakes. And what God is saying is, set up a way for you to be safe even when you make mistakes. It's not just about the good parts of a journey. It's also about the parts of a journey where you're going to need safety from the mistakes you're going to make by accident. The city shall serve you as refuge from the avenger, so that the killer may not die unless he has stood trial before the assembly. The towns that you thus assign shall be 6 cities of refuge in all. Right? It's not just one. Make sure they're all over. You're going to make lots of mistakes. Right? And this is not, by the way, this is not advocating for killing. This is not saying you should. This is just saying you might. You might. Right? We all know, not necessarily of people, but of stories where someone was doing something in their car and hit someone. Right? Or someone was crossing the street and got hit by somebody. Hopefully that wasn't intentional. Right? But that person is still going to have to stand up to a life now of guilt and punishment. And in our Torah, we recognize that. We recognize that humans are humans and that things happen. The towns that I already read that, you shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I myself abide, for I, God, abide among the Israelite people. So what this is also saying, I think this is such a powerful finishing sentence to this moment of setting up cities of refuge, is that what this is also saying is that by setting up these cities of refuge, by recognizing that you're going to make really big mistakes, you are keeping this place holy. You're allowing for the land to be holy because you're recognizing human beings as holy. You are giving them places to go so that they can be protected. Right? This is part of that journey. This is part of that, and we left the camp and we came to another. We left that camp and we came to another. Because as we know, and this is not just in our history, when we settle into a place, that doesn't always look good for the other people, right? When Christopher Columbus came over here and we decided that we were going to celebrate Thanksgiving, if we look back into our history, Thanksgiving isn't actually so good for those who were there when we arrived, right? But it's a part of our journey. It's a part of our journey, right? And we don't have to be proud of every part of our journey. But it's still a step along the way. Mark left, but it's still a step along his thing that he was talking about, triptych. Okay, I couldn't think of the term. Turn the page. So these are different commentaries that we're going to read based on just this entire idea here of journeys. They are connected back to certain verses, but I'm not as interested in the specificity of the verse and more so just the overall picture. So Ibn Ezra says, Moshe recorded all the journeys of the Israelites when the children of Israel camped in the plains of Moab and stayed there for a number of months. Until the aforementioned cities were built, they did not move from there until Aaron died. So what's Ibn Ezra answering here or getting at here? He's just commenting on the first 2 words of the Parsha, Elamase, these are the journeys. What's he commenting on? Yeah, Rebecca.
I think about the fact that these other random pieces of information are given within the...
Yeah, right, exactly. When I read this, I was thinking of, timelines that you had to make in elementary school where and maybe in rabbinical school, where you certain things happen, but then you have branches that come out of them to describe certain events within those periods of time. That's kind of what I imagine Ibn Ezra is getting at here, that you have to mention all those different spots, but then pop out once in a while and actually explain something that's happening. What else might he be getting at? Look very closely at the English translation. Yeah.
As well, and then we go back to Aaron. History that I guess we stayed in one place. Aaron died. Let's move.
Right. That we're also picking out characters that are important to our journey. Great. I'll give you an even bigger clue. How does he translate Elamase? Stages. Yeah. Why is that important? Why is that different? Yeah. Yeah, stages are not just, and then I drove to Santa Monica, and from Santa Monica I drove to Venice, and from to Venice I, it's not just about locale. It's about stages of life, right? People were born, people died, people got sick, people made mistakes. Ibn Ezra is commenting not on the actual spot on a map. He's commenting on the stages of life that occurred that we need to recognize by writing all these things down and understanding it. Alan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a question about this notion about
Yeah.
if they stayed there until the cities were built.
Yeah.
Like they arrived there was no city.
Yeah.
They were there, they built the city.
Yeah.
But they didn't depart until Aaron died.
Right.
I mean, you could probably only do that if they're all going to be traveling together in one city, not in the 40 cities or so that they're traveling all together. There seems to be an inconsistency.
I think they're making the point that there were, I think he is making the point that there were moments where they kind of passed through as part of their journey. And then back to Ari's point that there were also stages of life that had to occur in certain places, and that they're using Aaron's death as one of those examples, that they stayed in that particular place, they built up life there, and then they left. When Aaron had died, they moved on to the next stage, the next part of that journey. Yeah, Nico.
I think that there's like, I also feel like maybe another thing that Ibn Ezra is saying here is, I don't know about anybody else in the room, but both when Miriam and Aaron die, I'm like, oh, they just died suddenly.
Right.
You know, it's just like a verse, and then we move on. There's such significant characters and people, and it almost seems like Ibn Ezra is saying, actually, like it may seem that way in the text, but they stayed there for a while.
Yeah.
Because they
Nice.
recognized that Aaron was at the end of his life.
Nice.
And they needed to stay put while he finished that stage.
Right. That there's something about Aaron's character, Aaron's leadership, that we shouldn't just recognize it as one verse that changed a lot of life, and for his ended it, but for the people around him, there were things that came before, during, and after because of his connection to them. That's really beautiful. I like that a lot. Okay, because of the time, we're going to skip 2 of these commentaries. Go to the bottom here. Go to the Orach Chaim. So I'm gonna read it in English, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts here. Hold on one second. I'm just making sure I didn't. Okay, no. We also need to explore why the Torah chose to emphasize the journeys, the Israelites breaking camp, rather than to emphasize that they made camp, right? The Hebrew is that they broke down camp and then went somewhere else, rather than, and I arrived in Big Bear and we set up our tent, right? But rather the breaking down of the camp before they went to the next place. The question is especially relevant in view of Tanchuma of our verse, which describes the situation in terms of a parable. A king had a son who was sick. So he took him to one health spa, I love that that's what it's called, after another. When the son had finally been cured and the father took him back home, the father would reminisce with him about all the various places they had been together prior to the last one where the son had been cured. If the Midrash correctly summarizes the reason why the Torah lists all these journeys, it surely would have been more appropriate to list the places where they stopped over, for example, the arrivals. What is this parable telling us about the experience that we had of these journeys? Yeah, Hannah. Sorry.
Are maybe more important than the arrival.
Okay. That's definitely a phrase that has caught on. Okay, great. So maybe it's the getting there that is more important than when we actually get. Was that you, Ari?
I was just saying the bad stuff is part of the bad stuff's part of the good stuff.
Right, the bad stuff is definitely part of the good stuff. But what's the father doing here for his son? What's the father trying to emphasize for his son?
But it hadn't been about the illness. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
It was about the illness, but it was about the time they spent together, like the relationship they built over time.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have, I know Rabbi Baruch deals with this all the time, but I don't know if any of you are intimately involved in someone's health, journey, or working in a hospital and seeing someone's progression. There's a lot more than just entering the hospital with whatever you have and then hopefully leaving the hospital cured, right? Or not leaving the hospital because you succumbed to whatever it was that you had. There's a lot of in between. Right. And so, yes, it's a little bit about the journey rather than the destination. but it's also about like the strength that takes, the motivation that takes, the spirit that you need to have, the ups and the downs, as Ari said, right? It's not just about, I got there and then I left, or I got there and then I was unable to leave, but it was about how did you get through that? And the father brings that to his son, I think, as a way of showing strength, as a way of showing if this were to happen to you again, let's focus on the things that we experienced together from the time that we discovered this to the time that we are now able to depart from it. There was a lot that happened in between there, right? Did someone else have a hand? Rebecca, was that you?
Sort of repeating.
Okay. Glad to be on the same wavelength.
What's interesting is the
Yeah.
cures him. He does find
Right.
So how the actual journey.
Right. So maybe the journey was what cured him, right? Maybe that experience that the son had with whatever he was going through in the health spa cured him. Yeah.
So my family's actually gone through a health situation where basically the treatment that my uncle gets depends on whether he's able to walk to get up from bed.
Wow.
And get by himself.
Wow.
So the most sort of dramatic part of these last 2 weeks has been like, is he still walking? Like, can he still get up?
Yeah.
So like, I think of this and I think like, do not forget that you have the strength to decamp.
Yes.
And move forward.
Amazing. I'm sorry that your family is going through that, and what a beautiful connection to share, that you need to be reminded, even in moments where you don't feel like you have that strength, that the strength that you need to muster up in yourself is what's going to help you get to that remedy or that help that you need, because if you can't get up, you can't get to it, and so you need that strength to get up. Okay. And so much of that is in the people, right? Like if they hadn't moved, what could have happened to them if they had just stayed in one place, right? Or dwelled in the death of Aaron or whatever it might have been. Okay, turn the page. We're going to look at 2 of these 5 that I left for you. I hope that you enjoy all these sources at another time, but okay. The first verse on the 3rd page, Haktav ve'Kabbalah. We learn from this that the names of these places that are mentioned here are not the actual names that they had before. They are, in fact, the names that were given them as a result of the events that took place when Israel camped there. That, in my opinion, his opinion, is what was meant when Torah says Moshe recorded their departures for their journeys. He recorded all of the events that befell them on their journeys. That is in of itself why he mentioned afterwards the names of their encampments, because the names themselves describe the events that took place. So it's possible that the names that we are reading are not the names of the places that they actually went to, but rather the way in which they remembered the name of the place. Could it have been, to go back to Bobby's point, could it have been that based off of memory it was an inside joke? Could it have been that it was the name of a person who took leadership in that particular camp? Could it have been, as I mentioned before, an actual feeling that they were feeling in that space, and so they named it after that feeling? Right? That it wasn't the name of the city or the name of the encampment, but rather the way in which they were experiencing it. Okay, go to the Guide for the Perplexed. This is why I think this is important in the 21st century and how we can record our own journeys. It was indeed most necessary that these should be written, meaning the comings and goings, for miracles are only convincing to those who witnessed them, while coming generations who know them only from the account given by others may consider them as untrue. Okay, first of all, I think what was happening here probably was trying to get people to believe that the Torah was true, right? Understanding that things are written down and you might not believe them because you want to be a critic, but if they are written down, they are the account of somebody and therefore they are true. Their truth, I should say. But miracles cannot continue and last for all generations. It is even inconceivable that they should be permanent. All these miracles were wonderful, public, and witnessed by people. So last Yom Kippur, the sermon that I gave was about legacy. And I think this actually has a lot to do with that when we write things down, that when we leave an account for people, when we're dealing with a family member who needs to be reminded by those around him to get up and do something, right, we are actually bringing to life miracles that can happen with people around and the memory that's then going to live on for generations to come, not just in your own body. So when someone passes away, inevitably, when I meet with the family, they often say, I wish I had asked more questions about X, right? I actually don't remember where that person came from. I really wish I had asked. Because there comes a certain time where the main source is no longer available to us, right? And so this, what the Torah is doing for us, is allowing us a window into these beautiful things that happened. And even if we don't want to believe that they're true, we can see an account for what someone believed to be true as to what their journey was. Right? So truth doesn't actually matter in this particular case. What matters is the fact that someone went on these journeys and it made a difference for them in their experience. Bobby.
I was talking with Naz about this last night because we're in election season. I'm not getting into politics, but
Yeah.
so they're like,
You can, I just won't, but yeah.
like trying to convince somebody of their truth or their truth and how their truth is wrong or right. And
Yeah.
you know, when your family comes from a different background, they have a totally different story, so their worldview, even if it's not your current worldview, like that was their worldview, and that's the prism they see the world.
Yeah.
So you sometimes have to like get underneath the surface with that person to understand why they're wired that way.
Yeah, great. And I think that some of that comes with, political or not, like even our own lives, some of that comes with proof, right? Some of that comes with saying, I know you've heard this story of where your grandparents met. Let me actually show you the location so that story can come to life. Not because you might think it's untrue, but because if you don't have the proof in front of you, it might not click for you in the same way as providing it as a truth for you. Yeah, Rebecca, Nico, and then we'll finish. Did someone have a hand? No. Yeah.
I think one of the things that comes out to me when I think about the fact that it's supposed to show the truth is that it's kind of hard to believe.
Yeah.
They were walking for 40 years
Right.
and didn't establish a home somewhere.
Yeah,
Because
great.
40 years is a long time.
Yeah.
But it's clear from this recount that every place they stopped was a camp. It wasn't a real home. It wasn't a city.
Right.
And so that might be sort of...
Right, and something that you just said that I had never thought of before, it is very possible that people stayed, right? That you might happen upon Lake Arrowhead and think, this is where I want to be. And so they left the rest of the group and stayed there because 40 years is a really long time to make a home. And maybe what we're supposed to learn from this is a whole nother teaching that I didn't expect to share. But maybe what we're expect to learn from this is that community is going to continue to go, right? This community, God willing, is going to last many more years after any of the rabbis here are rabbis here, right? And that the community still goes. There's momentum for the community. But people drop off to figure out their own homes and their own paths. And maybe that happened to people, and that's why there's a sense of making camp and leaving camp, because certain people stayed and made that camp their home. It's a really, really, thank you for sharing that. It's a really beautiful idea. Yeah, Nico.
I'm thinking about other things, like the guy for the complex was written for Rob's most discerning and educated readers.
Yeah.
And also with that in mind, what strikes me here is what miracles cannot continue and last for all generations. It's even inconceivable that they should be permanent. So I imagine that folks who can get to the level of reading this, especially in its original form, are probably pretty skeptical and might get into the habit of saying if this is true, then why are Jews being treated the way we're being treated? If God, if God chose us X, Y, and Z, whatever. It almost seems to say yes, actually things do change. Because there was a miracle doesn't mean that the sort of consequences of that miracle are going to last forever.
Yeah, nice.
It happened, but things change.
Nice.
So it's very much, I think it's kind of trying to have a both and moment of you have the skepticism, that's true, and the fact that this also happened is true as well. So
Nice, and that kind of piggybacks around with Bobby's also. That's very nice. So I hope that this brought to life a objectively boring part of our Torah, especially if you're just reading it alongside the person who's reading the Torah, right? And they came and they went and they came and they went and they came and they went. It's like reading a census, and the names and the names and the names and the names. It's not really so exciting. But what I hope this does for you is allows you to see that to someone else who we are not in relationship, our lives also aren't that interesting, right? If we're not in relationship with someone, if I'm not in relationship with someone, my life is of no interest to them because they don't know me, and why would they care about my life? So if I wrote things down, they would be just as boring as this list of places. But as soon as we invest in the reason to which these places are written down, and the reason that they were in certain places, and the reason for this journey, and we decide to be part of that community and see this as a part of our journey, now all of a sudden it's important. And now all of a sudden we recognize these places and for what they are and for what they did. So I hope you are each, as we go into, we were supposed to do the Birkat HaChodesh, the blessing for the new month. As we go into this new month, recognizing that Elul and Tishrei are fast approaching, that you have a sense of how are you writing down your journeys? How are you sharing your journeys with the people who are important to you? And how are you recognizing that journey doesn't just mean the great things and the great moments and the great memories, but also those things along the way that you and those who love you can also learn from. Shabbat Shalom.